And we're live for another Zoom-oriented quarantine bridging the gap podcast for, I don't know, what day are we in? I mean, it's the second time we're doing it, so we're technically, what, 14 days in?
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So, I kind of want to start this one up with everyone's complaining about what's going on and how we're going about it and a lack of data, myself included. I understand that data is just not forthcoming. It's being built. So I thought it'd be an interesting exercise to just figure out or discuss the logic of meeting something like this head on and how we would logically play it out ourselves. Because I think a lot of criticism comes from people just wanting an answer. And like you said, a lot of anger comes out of the unknown. So I just figured I'd start with that little thought exercise, which is, so how would you go about it? I know how I would go about it, but I just figured I'd just put it out there, ruminate, and I'll let you take the first crack, Dan.
I think in situations like this, one of the things that drives me nuts, but really makes people harm themselves, is that they decide what they think is happening first. And then they look for information that confirms what they already think. So if I think that COVID is this serious and someone says it's below that, well, then I immediately say that person's not taking it seriously enough. If I find someone who agrees with me, then I say, see, I was right. And then if I find someone who's more panicky than I am, then I just up my panic level to match their panic level. So then, or I just say, oh, that person's just being panicky and disregard the information. And just everything has to be analyzed in terms of how far is it from what I already think. Instead of, why does what I think matter that much? I need to find out what's actually out there, what's factual, and change and adapt along with it. What information's out there and try and analyze it. But people get so stuck on that doesn't agree with what I think, so it must be wrong.
It's really interesting because it's such a marketing ploy, as I'm sure being a psychology major in college, everything is psychology. So even though I strive to be a very logical person, we discussed the idea about the importance of being logical behind everything, because emotions really aren't what drive facts. Emotions might drive you to go find facts, but as you said, oftentimes emotions find us finding facts that fit our emotional default position. So one of the things that your son will start to work on at the yellow belt level is a program that I developed called See, Say, Do, Ask, Tell, Yell. So I'm going to take a look at this virus from a martial perspective, and I like that you took it from the psychological perspective because it suits our narratives personally. So I really like that you addressed that, because I think it's really what people do is say, I feel this way about it, so I'm just going to go find out my confirmational bias and pat myself on the back and look at everyone else strangely. So the program is meant to filter out what actually raises to the level of violence. So I'm speaking to you as an adult. I explain it slightly different to the kids because most of their stuff probably won't rise to the level of violence if they're pretty savvy at it, especially in a school situation. And the level of violence is slightly different at that age group. So when it comes to adults, I basically say I'm teaching you how to qualify someone for violence, which I think is kind of a neat way of putting it out there because, as I said, most things don't rise to the level of violence. So I'm going to talk back and forth between the martial way I think about it and the way I think about the coronavirus. And that is, the coronavirus is a potential violent actor upon our country, let's just say. So the first thing I teach kids is that if you can't see what's happening, you can't do anything about it. So obviously we could see it coming. We just didn't know how fast. So what I tell the kids, it's you see something, then you say something, which is there's a problem in this case. A very simple way of saying is here's a problem. Coronavirus is its name. And the last part is you have to do something about it. So the first thing is you want to make distance in a personal setting, and we want to distance ourselves from a virus. Because we presumed, rightfully or wrongfully, but we presumed it was coming from China, a good response would be to distance ourselves from China. So without getting involved in the politics, let's just say, check, we did have some restrictions being put on China in travel from Asia at the end of January. So I would say that's relevant to the philosophy that I espouse when it comes to actually dealing with the physical potential violent actor. The other three are the ask, tell, yell part, which is I might ask you, why are you encroaching on my space? I might tell you, I don't want you to encroach my space. And lastly, if you come very quickly, yell, I'm going to yell at you that you need to back off to let you know I'm serious, to let the public know that there might be someone attacking me, possibly to dissuade you, but also to alert other people that might be of aid. But also it's about moving on an arc. So I'm curving around you so that I can also see if there's anyone behind me that also might be trying to bop me on the head. Now, the reason why I like talking about this for the personal as well as the general global situation is we've gotten to the point where the speed of it went from not take your time, ask, and then take your time, tell, and then take your time, yell, and then also be physical. We went basically from see, say there's a problem, do something, which is the restrictions, to all of a sudden the thought process is binary. Complete and utter panic or measured response, which is what we talked about last time. And I would say that we kind of fell somewhere in between there. Looking back on it now for 2 weeks, we fell somewhere in between there with the quarantining. Now, judging by the number of criticisms I'm seeing, I actually can't complain about the way this has been done from an administrative standpoint, because there's everyone, D's and R's involved in it, or in the way the American people handled it. Because like we said, there's going to be those extremes on either side, but it seems like at this point, we've done a good job at exercising that, triage of filtration that I would choose to do against a potential violent actor. Now, we still don't know how violent the actor is because there's not enough data, but I certainly would say that distancing ourselves from it the way that we have may or may not have been the right overreaction. But as I say to people who might question, well, what if I just yell at somebody? I say, look, I'm like yelling at somebody placatively and saying, back up. I'm a little worried about you. Is embarrassing, but at least it protects you. So I'd say we are at that kind of yelling and physical backing off phase, and we don't know if we're embarrassed yet or we've taken appropriate action.
And I would say, kind of with the ask, tell, yell, what you're talking about is least extreme, appropriate response to a given situation, right?
Yeah.
Like, does this rise to the level of yell? So someone sits a little closer to me than I'm comfortable with on a subway, and I start screaming at them, right? Not appropriate, right?
Yeah.
That's an ask situation. Like, hey, dude, can you give me a little space? That's an ask situation.
Yeah.
Someone runs at me with a knife on a subway. That's a yell situation.
Yeah. And it might even go right to a punch him in the face situation.
Exactly.
Because there's no time to yell.
Yeah. So, and I think we tend to struggle with that. The other issue is, I think sometimes we get a little bit too locked into ourselves. And so what is the danger here? What do I need to keep myself safe? What do I need to keep myself safe and my family safe? Yeah. And then that's as far as the thought process goes. And it would be nice if we could apply your ask, tell, yell, see, say, do to us as a populace. There's only so much PPE equipment. There's only so many masks. There's only so many gloves. And then as a populace, we say, who needs those gloves the most? Who's the most at risk? Let's make sure they have enough. and seeing ourselves as the populace instead of ourselves as me. You know, there's not that many gloves. I'm going to buy every single one I can get my hands on. There's not that many masks. I'm going to buy every single one I can get my masks on and use them all the time and waste them, not understanding how they work or how to use them. If we saw ourselves, if we saw me as us as a country, it would benefit all of us, because we'd say, what do we need? What do we need to do? Where do we need to allocate resources? Who do we need to make sure are the most protected? Who are the most vulnerable in this situation? And it would be nice if we could apply exactly what you talked about to us instead of to me.
And that's where I think the power of the individual and at least the attempt in the American experiment through the Constitution was trying to do.
Yeah,
I think that
absolutely.
You really look at some of these older statements. I think it was Jefferson that says basically every once in a while that a generation will have to water the tree of liberty with blood. It sounds very ominous and very Shakespearean and very dark, but in a weird way, what it's basically saying is every once in a while we forget exactly how fragile society is, and we end up having something very strange happen as a country or as a society, either internally with civil strife or externally at war, where we have to reevaluate the fact that we should be valuing exactly what we have. And I think for far too long, the kind of me generation, or the personalization kind of generation, which I have to say that the age of personalization obviously extends way beyond any given generation. And I would say that people our age and older are just as stuck in that age of personalization as some of the younger kids. And I think they should know better, because in this day of personalization, I think we've taken it so far that we are kind of becoming our own private islands with our own private militaries, protecting ourselves from everyone else, which I think is, in some ways, it makes sense because we are individual sovereign beings. But in another way, we're not really, as you said, respecting our other fellow citizens in the way that, hey, I don't need all this PPE equipment. I've been home. I haven't been traveling that much. I've driven maybe 2 or 3 times in the last 2 weeks to run errands, and that's it. I don't need to be in a full hazmat suit. So there's no reason why, and it would be really funny if I just tilted the camera and showed a stockpile. And here are my 200 hazmat suits that I haven't used yet.
Well, and also if gloves worked the way people in grocery stores appear to think that they worked, they'd be the greatest invention in human history. Because apparently they think if you're wearing gloves, you're immune to everything. People are wearing gloves for hours, which they don't realize maximizes the number of germs under the glove. You have like 100 to 200 times the germs under your glove after 10 minutes or so. Then they're touching their face and they're on the phone. I mean, I walk around and watch them like I'm at a zoo, just watching people. And I'm like, if there's anything on your gloves, which there is now, it's all over your face. And I would love to I love your approach to taking this as, instead of coronavirus, imagine it's a fight. And what would you do in a fight scenario, in a fight situation? So if I'm with a group of friends and coronavirus, COVID-19 is another group of friends who decides they're going to fight us. If I'm looking out for me, I'm going to pick the smallest, weakest looking, for lack of a better term, person and fight them and let my friends fight who's ever left, right? If I'm looking out for the group, we're going to try and figure out who takes who that gives the 3 of us the best chance to get through this as okay as possible, right? And all those people with the gloves.
I'm tickled pink that you're taking this and running with this so well. Keep going.
Absolutely. It's a perfect example. So then all of us get through this okay. Those people with the gloves are like, I'll take the 2-foot-nothing person in the corner who's hiding and crying. That's who I'll fight.
Yes.
Right?
That's who I'll fight. I'll take my gloves off and throw my gloves off.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's just very, very strange. You know, I was thinking as you were talking about it, and now I've completely lost my train of thought because I was just sidetracked by the humor of it all. But yeah, oh, that's what it was. When you're kind of thinking about watching people engage in the use of gloves correctly or incorrectly, it's very much akin to me watching a movie and seeing martial type stuff and gunfighting stuff and just looking at it and shaking my head and just having to, pass on, disbelief to enjoy the movie. But it's the same thing. You're just looking at people, oh gosh, that stuff doesn't work. Why do people do that? Or you see some really uh, goofy martial self-defense stuff that was being passed around on the internet on Facebook not too long ago, where this girl was doing very suspect movements, but every movement that she did, the person always fell on the floor. And it was always one movement. The guy went to choke her, she did this. He went to punch her, she did this. And every single movement, the guy just collapses on the floor. I'm like, yeah, like that's really sending a bad message to people that it's somehow magic.
Yeah, because then you tell the person who's acting with her, you say, okay, now I want you to really try and hurt her, and then see how well those things work, right?
Yes, yes. So it's very sad because we have so much information at our fingertips, yet in a weird way, we're such ethereal, mercurially emotional beings that we grasp onto things like talismans rather than think the problem through. And I think one of the things that we are trying to encourage in our dialogue is to provide an example of forget about what side you default to and forget about what talisman you hold on to and start just thinking the problem through, like what we've been doing today, which is the psychological default of basically a cognitive bias. What do you call that?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah. Or just using the CSADO as a way of filtering it out. And there's so much information out there that it's hard to filter a lot of it out, because you can point to a dozen different doctors out there talking about COVID, and you'll get a dozen different opinions about what you should or should not do.
And the last like 3 of these, we have been talking a lot about COVID, but we're not talking about COVID, right? Which could be confusing to someone, but this is an easy example to talk about a bunch of different topics and subjects and human biases, because extreme situations like this shine a spotlight on great leadership. They shine a spotlight on terrible leadership. They shine a spotlight on people's biases because everything's elevated. So it's so easy to point to the mistakes we make that in any other scenario might look small. It's so much easier to see it when you shine a spotlight on it like this. Like you said, the cognitive biases. It's so much more apparent right now because this situation is more extreme. But they impact us every day in every decision that we make throughout every single week.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, it's so funny. As I'm listening to you, I'm also trying to look at you and the camera. So to me, I'm guessing it looks like I'm looking at no one. And you're doing a great job of eye contact with the camera, but I'm so used to looking at you talking that I'm trying to go back and forth between the camera and camera 1, camera 2, camera 1.
I'm doing the same thing while you're talking and then trying. It's hard to
Yeah,
keep in your head though. This is a weird
yeah, because I
exercise.
basically have to look this way in order to make myself look like I'm looking at you, which is really at my coffee mug. Okay, so it's just sidebar antics that both of us are having to go through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I don't know what we do different, because at the end of the day, as you just expressed, it's a stressor of any kind of positive or negative, because it could be extreme wealth or extreme poverty, extremely happy situation or extremely dire situation that really challenges people to either rise or fall to their level of ignorance, really is probably the easiest way to say it. Because if you're not putting a good logical filter out there all the time, then you're going to get caught up in the mania of a time like this. And there's plenty of it. I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was just putting information out there because he's a dentist, but obviously, he knows enough about things to talk about them more adequately on the bioorganic chemical makeup than I do. And I just put something out to him. And the response wasn't about what I asked him to respond to. The response was where the information came from. And my point to him was, look, I value your opinion, which is why I gave you this breakdown from this doctor. But because the doctor was from a source that he was uncomfortable with, not that the guy wasn't a real doctor, it was just because it was a link that, the wrong color, like red or blue link, wasn't the appropriate color coded scheme to him. It was more of a conversation about where the information came from rather than the informant. And I think that's also what makes having these conversations difficult, because it's totally fine to say, hey, look, I think that doctor's wrong. Totally fine.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to know. What do you think of this doctor's opinion? Just say no. I think his opinion is incorrect as far as I know it, and I don't know why he's coming to that conclusion. That's totally fine. Like you said, sometimes it's appropriate to say, hey, that therapist did you wrong.
Yeah.
Period. And I'm okay with that. But to say that, well, that therapist came from such and such a group, and that such and such a group thinks such and such a way, doesn't really clarify whether the therapist is good or not. It just clarifies that you have an opinion about the broader group that person's, being, guilted by association.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're no longer having a discussion about information or facts or opinions. You're just having a discussion about whether or not you like this person, or other things that this person thinks that don't apply to this. And that's where we've gotten in all of politics, right? That person's a Republican, so I disagree with them. How do you know? You haven't heard their opinion yet. You already decided? That person's a Democrat, I agree with them. That person's a Republican, I agree with them. You don't even know the topic, the subject, or their opinion on it, or what they plan to do about it, and you already disagree or agree with them?
Yeah.
Well, that's not really agreeing or disagreeing, right? That's just saying, I don't like that person. There's plenty of people that I have learned a lot from who I do not like as a human being.
Yeah.
And then people who I really like as a human being, who I would not take their advice on anything. And I would love to take their advice, but every time I ask for their advice, it's terrible advice. So I haven't decided, well, there's no way I'll ever take it, but I haven't yet. But I really like that person as a human.
It's like the great looking guy or girl that you know in your life that are really awesome to hang out with, and you would not wish them on another member to date ever.
Yeah.
You're like, I absolutely love you, but I will never set you up with anybody because you're a complete relationship disaster.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's funny that you bring that up, because especially in politics, you can just have one word being taken out of context and a whole new narrative is created about another reason to hate, a blue or a red or a D or an R, because I heard this one word out of context, and now I'm going to apply it to a context that most likely fits with my cognitive bias.
Exactly. And then that just adds more evidence and more evidence. And that's what in cognitive behavior therapy, that's what they call the schemas, that you create a schema of a certain thing or of a certain group, and you decide that everybody within that group fits in that particular schema. So you keep taking stuff that agrees with you and adding to the schema over and over and over again, until now it seems like it's a fact that everyone in that group is exactly who I thought they were all the time, no matter what they say, what changes, what new information I get. None of it matters because I've already decided they're all this. They all fit in this.
And the scary part is precisely because that's happening, it happens more. Meaning now, if you say something that could possibly be like X or Y, people immediately just glom a whole bunch of monolithic thought processes because you said one word. And all of a sudden it just ends up backfiring, because then the person sees that reaction and then throws a monolithic behavior right back, which is why one of the most important things that we keep talking about is, let's talk about the problem. Whatever the problem is, let's talk about the problem, how to solve it as a logical group of human beings that have different levels of skill sets and experiences, like you said in the positive gang versus the coronavirus gang. It's like, how do we best utilize each other's strengths and skill sets to combat what it is that we need to protect ourselves from? And instead, it's more akin to, well, you're just as mean as that coronavirus, so you might as well just go over there in the coronavirus. And some of the coronavirus, kind of COVID guys would be looking at it like, well, you don't even really want to infect people, so why don't you go over those good people? It's just, personifying the COVID is probably the best thing we've ever come up with right now.
I agree.
It's just so funny. By the way,
and it works perfectly. I mean, it makes sense.
Have you seen the ridiculous meme that just got such a chuckle from me? It was a bunch of prehistoric animals that were by the river, and they're saying, quick, wash your hands, wash your hands. And then there's a cell of coronavirus, little spheres, chasing after them. And there's a dinosaur saying, I need help, I can't wash my hands, I can't wash my hands.
Yeah.
Somebody help me, help. And then the next cell is a coronavirus basically just like pelting the dinosaur with short little arms, just covered with coronavirus.
Yes.
I just, the memes are just great with this. And, there's got to be some type of hilarity going on here, because without gallows humor, no one would ever walk away from the gallows. They'd all just line up next to the person that was just hung. I don't know. I don't know. So, yeah, data, it's shortcoming,
Unfortunately, yeah. And I think at the end of this, I'm hoping that we can all take a moment to look back on this and use this as a great opportunity to say, how did we respond? How did I personally respond? How could I have responded better? Because at the end of any situation like this, leaders and people individually just talk about what a great job everyone did coming together, whether that's true or not. It would have been worse if we didn't come together so well. Everyone did a great job. Everyone's great. Pat yourselves on the back. That's what everybody says at the end of these all the time, no matter how it turns out.
Yeah.
So if we could take a minute to pretend like that's not a thing, ignore that, and just say, I'm sure I could have done this better. I'm sure we could have done this better. How could we have done this better? So if this ever happens again, if something worse like this happens, we'll do a better job. We'll have better systems in place. We'll respond better as individuals because we looked back and said, I think I could have done better there.
I hope you're right. But the interesting part is, I was just reflecting while you were saying that, is one of the problems we don't do that often enough is because we don't have enough emotional resilience, I think, as a general public. And I know I'm kind of, poo-pooing the common average man and woman right now, but I think it is kind of a shame of what's happened in a societal standpoint, that at the end of any tragedy, everyone needs to have a high five. There's something about every extreme low has to have a high five at the end of it, and every extreme high has to have a high five at the end of it. And it's just kind of perplexing, because it's really not how we develop better systems. And it's not really how we piggyback on our wins. Winning, yes, is a time to celebrate. Okay, fine, give it a high five, and then say, okay, Now, how can we even do better next time? What were some highlights? What were some lowlights? And same thing on the other end, which is, hey, if you, as the, what is it, Patton that said it, which is if you find yourself in hell, keep driving.
Yeah.
So you do have to keep driving through it, but at the end, again, there's an opportunity for self-reflection, and instead it seems like, and I hope I'm wrong, it seems more like we'll just say, whoosh, we dodged another bullet,
Yeah.
rather than how do we not have bullets being sent our way in the first place?
Yeah.
How do we organize ourselves to be a little bit more nimble? And here's the hoping that you're right, but I think we've kind of set ourselves up for this immediate gratification society and this very hyperbolic, divisive, and very I can't help but go back to the stock market about the high frequency trading computers, is that we seem to love the volatility because we just keep creating it.
Yeah.
Subconsciously. Yeah.
And I agree with you that we're going to, at the end of this, probably just go whew and pat ourselves on the back, which is too bad. It's a missed opportunity in a major extreme situation to really evaluate us at an individual level, as a statewide level, as a people, as a country, as a globe, to really reevaluate how we handle situations like this and do a better job. And how many opportunities do you get where you have a shared experience in the world?
Yeah.
And then everybody in the world can grow from the same shared experience. It would be really too bad to completely waste the opportunity of this tragedy to become better from it. And instead just say, woo. But that is usually what we do, because once it's over, we just don't want to think about it anymore. Instead of saying, what a wonderful opportunity we have to get better, to improve, to make sure that the next COVID-19 doesn't claim as many lives, to make sure that we have a better response to it, because the next COVID-19 could be a lot more severe than COVID-19. Not that it's not serious, not that people aren't dying, but there are worse viruses.
Yeah, no, and it's a brilliant point that you're making, because it is a worldwide opportunity to reevaluate everything. And the second part about that, about kind of dodging the bullet, is what people would talk about, after 9/11, is that people were going back to, acting like it was September 10th, where they're losing it. And one of the interesting things, I'll have to send you this YouTube video, and it dovetails with your Heath Ledger Joker point of view, which is we become so used to having certain things happen in our lives and just assimilate the risk comfortability, basically.
Yeah.
So when we were, you're a little bit younger than me, but it was still probably on the forefront of your teenage years. But as soon as I was a teenager, AIDS was the big thing.
Yeah.
So just as teens are dabbling in sexual activity, it was AIDS, but then within 5 to 10 years, it was one of those things where it's calculated, now 30 years later, for me, it's just totally like AIDS. Who dies of AIDS anymore? And cancer and heart disease and all these things, once they are no longer novel, and this is partly positive about the human condition, because otherwise we'd be paranoid about everything. But the other part of it is, like you said, there's an opportunity to reevaluate our habits, not only on a daily basis, but in our habits when it comes to extremist circumstances that allow us to navigate through these extreme circumstances in a more logical and successful way, and perhaps maybe not spending so much time backbiting our fellow man, and instead trying to actually give credit where credit is due and say, you know what, I don't care what color shirt you're wearing, that's actually a really good idea.
Yeah, because those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, right?
Yeah. Or I like what my friend says, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes.
Oh, I like that.
Which I think is a very,
That's
very
good.
clever way. And I don't know where he
That's
got it
good.
from, or he just came up with himself, but it really makes a lot of sense because
Yeah.
everyone always acts like, well, it's never happened before. It's the first time this ever happened. No, these things actually happen to pretty much every generation.
Yeah.
It comes out a little bit differently. I was talking to some of the older kids on Friday, I think it was, and I asked how many of them had grandparents that might have been in World War II or Vietnam, and a couple of them raised their hand. And one of the kids specifically said his grandfather was in World War II. I said, well, that's a perfect example of kind of what we're going through. So during World War II, I said, people were called to action, and more importantly, Americans at home were called to action to, either recycle or reuse or come in and help out with all these different war efforts. And your job as a young kid is to basically just be resilient. Your job is to stay at home, do your schoolwork, do your martial arts, don't get underfoot from your parents getting their job done. And the biggest wartime effort you can do is just not be in the way. Just don't cause any problems. That's really not much to ask.
Yeah.
There's a funny
but it
meme.
also puts some responsibility on them, like you're not a bystander, right? And everyone gets a little more nervous and a little more scared when they have no control. And it's like, no, you're a part of this. You have something to do. Now, it might not be complicated and it might be pretty simple because it's appropriate for where you are and what your capabilities and age level is. But you have a part to play in this. You have something to do.
Yeah, you have a positive role. And that positive role is just not, dragging anything down or distracting your parents from what they need to do.
Exactly.
It's a real good opportunity for families to really come together.
Yeah, and to tell kids you have a responsibility to your family, and your parents don't just have a responsibility to you. You have a responsibility to help them now. Kids rise to that challenge and take that so much more serious than just trust your parents, they'll do everything you need. If you can say, no, you have an opportunity here to help your parents, to help things go easier, kids respond so much more positively to that than just trust the system, trust everything, don't worry about it, you have nothing to do here.
I think we have a great opportunity to have the next round of latchkey kids, the COVID kids, that are just some of the most successful, resilient, and disciplined and focused kids on the planet, because they're getting this opportunity to really have an opportunity to stand up and shine through this. And I think that's probably a great positive note to tie a bow on this, because I think
absolutely agree.
Nailed it. Hey, well, good luck at work today. And
thank you.
We'll just keep doing it this way until we don't have to.
Yep.
Because, man, I can't wait to physically make contact with people again. It's just like handshakes and hugs and just hanging out and clinking a glass together.
Hopefully soon.
And going to a restaurant.
Yes.
A lot of them. All right, man. Enjoy your day.
Take
Signing
care.
off.
Sounds good.